Hello and welcome. You're watching Newsx with me, Devika Devan. A historic and high-stakes legal showdown is underway in Manhattan as we speak, as the deposed leader of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, is making his first appearance in a U.S. federal courtroom. Just moments ago, an armored convoy arrived at the Daniel Patrick Moynihan courtroom, transporting Maduro from the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. Him and his wife, Celia Flores, were captured on Saturday in a daring U.S. Special Operations raid in Caracas. Today, they face a judge to be formally charged with narco-terrorism and cocaine importation, crimes that U.S. prosecutors say fueled a corrupt, illegitimate government for over 2 decades. The hearing, will be presided over by Judge Alvin Hellerstein and is expected to be brief but explosive. Legal experts anticipate Maduro's legal team will immediately challenge the U.S. court's jurisdiction, claiming sovereign immunity. Outside, security is at an all-time high as protesters and international observers gather, while at the UN, an emergency session has been called to debate the legality of the extraction. We're expecting a plea of not guilty and a swift move towards a trial that could reshape the geopolitics of the Americas. Yes, that's how serious this is. And I take this conversation forward. I have with me Major General Gigi Dwivedi, Global and Strategic Defense Expert. We have with us Mr. Andrew Latham, International Affairs Expert, joining me from Minneapolis. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, former diplomat, and Alison Mutler, former AP Bureau Chief, will also be joining me from Romania shortly. Let me begin with Mr. Latham, who joins us from the United States of America. Mr. Latham, I have to understand from you, firstly, what really is the atmosphere like in America right now? What is everyone anticipating?
Well, the atmosphere is polarized, and not a surprise to anybody. Those who are favorably disposed towards President Trump are divided, actually. There are the MAGA hardliners who think that this is just another forever war, which they voted for him because they were opposed to forever wars. And there are also those, though, who are Trump supporters who think this was a good move because Maduro had it coming in some way, shape, or form, and it's connected to the drugs epidemic and whatnot. And then on the other side, altogether on the left, the progressive side, there's a deep suspicion of Trump's moves, the legality in terms of the American Constitution, the War Powers Resolution, but also its legality under international law, simply taking into custody a foreign head of state, however legitimate or not, a foreign head of state, extraditing him forcibly to the United States and putting him up before an American court. That sets a precedent which is not unprecedented. It was done to Noriega back in '89, but it's pretty close to unprecedented. And a lot of people on the left, progressive, center left, however you want to characterize it, look at this and they're not welcoming the precedent that it's setting and what might come next. So, as always in America, the opinion is radically divided. What's new now is Trump supporters are also divided over this.
Okay. Ambassador Kapoor, then bringing you into the conversation, I have to understand from you, do you feel that with the actions of the United States of America, and I'm sure that they have a great justification for it, which we'll hear of shortly once the trial actually begins, but are we seeing somewhere, when I talk about the larger impact on geopolitics, are we seeing a definite pivot from liberal interventionism to a more transactional, sort of resource-driven foreign policy? And what's the precedent that's being set here?
Well, I think it's going to lead to a lot of complications. The international order is being turned upside down completely with this act. And the panelist before me has spoken very eloquently about the situation here. And what we are seeing here is that, you are passing judgments in the US, you are passing indictments in the US against presidents who are presidents of sovereign countries. There is no other entity which is validating those indictments. There is no United Nations which is validating. There's no other entity at all beyond the United States. Then you are trying to say that US laws will prevail on that country also. And then you say that he will be tried in the US court by US judges. So I think it is many layers of paradigm shifts which we are seeing here, which is going to create a lot of complications for the US going ahead. The rule of law and the Westphalian system of definition of states and the Vienna protocols and lots of these have been put under challenge. The only paradigm of international law which this seems to indicate is that there is only one principle in international law which is left, and that is, if I have the bombs, if I have the weapons, if I have the might, if I have the capacity, I can do whatever I want anywhere in the world. So, and the other aspect is that the illegality of it will, of course, be discussed in many, arenas for many years, because here you have picked up the wife of the president also, without any indictment, and then you say there is a sealed indictment in U.S. Against her, which was not even announced anywhere before her arrest. Now you are arresting the spouse of the head of a state without any documentation whatsoever. So that means tomorrow you can pick up any head of state of any country of the world and then say that there is a sealed indictment against him in a US court. So it's just mind-boggling, the level of complications. And then you're issuing a threat against the son of the president and indicting him also, telling the president and his wife basically that if you do not cooperate, if you do not behave, we will pick up your son and bring him here also. So it's just basically rewriting of a lot of things. It's also saying that my focus is on the Western Hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine is now the Donroe Doctrine, Donroe being Donald Trump Doctrine. And I'm not interested what happens in other parts of the world, as long as in my zone of interest, my zone of influence, my writ runs large. So the other countries are free to do what they want, wherever they want to do whatever they have to do. If China wants to take over Taiwan tomorrow, there's no justification for the US to raise any objection to that. If Russia takes over larger parts of Ukraine, US cannot say anything in a moral point of view. So it is many layers of complications, ethics, morals, values, which have been violated in this case and are being violated. And you are parading a president of a sovereign country as if he's a common criminal in the US, as if he's a US citizen, and he's liable under US laws. For me, as a diplomat who's worked for many decades in so many countries, I've seen them intervene, seen the US intervention in so many other countries, where the interventions have gone very badly, as the whole world knows, because there has not been enough planning or thinking or strategizing as to what do you do after the intervention. In Chile, when I was ambassador there in Chile, they had done something similar for resources, for economic purposes. The president Allende at that time, he had refused to let the American companies continue to extract copper without giving any profits or sharing any profits with Chile. So he said that we need to have some profit, some money left back for Chile. And they deposed him. They co-opted one of the generals, Pinochet, who was the chief of the Air Force at that time. The CIA mounted a sort of an assault through General Pinochet. And Allende died in that entire exercise as a president of a sovereign country. Thereafter, when Pinochet took over power, he said, Allende was right in the sense that America is taking away all the copper. So when America put the gun on his head and said that please rewrite the laws and allow Americans to and denationalize the copper companies again, which Allende had nationalized. He said, no, I'm not going to denationalize the companies because Chile does not get anything out of its own natural resources. It's America which is benefiting. So then he said, what I can do is I can give more licenses to American companies, but even in those licenses, Americans will have to share the profits of the resources which are being taken out of Chile. So America had to agree to that. So more new companies were created. But so many other examples are there where I've worked in so many countries and learned a lot more about all these processes. But what we are seeing rolling out today is something which is transgressing, I guess, all norms, all ethics, all morals, all laws. So I don't think it's going to be a good thing for the US in the long run. We are seeing unraveling of the Western world's hold on power, the colonialism which they were imposing centuries back. They're trying to reimpose now the economic colonialism. With the internet, with the modern era, that's not going to succeed because the opposition to that in other Latin American countries, I'm seeing this thing happen in front of their eyes of a
Yes.
president of a sovereign country being blindfolded, being handcuffed, being brought to court like an ordinary, jailer who's committed, ordinary prisoner who's committed a lot of crimes in the U.S. And it's absolutely shocking for me as a diplomat. Thank you.
Okay, Major and Gigi Zvedi, on that note, I also want to understand from you, does this extraction of Maduro actually risk a very decentralized sort of an insurgency phase that could almost destabilize the entire region more than what the regime was doing itself, or more than what the US claims the regime was up to?
Well, Devika, firstly, as a military historian, if we look at America's history, especially after the World War II, wherever they intervened, they are either come out very unsuccessfully, sometimes they have bitten the dust and left more chaos than orderliness. And that we can start from 1950, 53 Korean War. In fact, I was defense attaché in North Korea and China. So I can say with certain amount of conviction that things stand where they are in 1950. And then, of course, they followed on with the intervention in, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and Afghanistan, war against the global terrorism. Well, you know what happened. General Chris had to take the last flight in C-130 on 15 August 2020, and that defeat, I think, will show on the American armed forces. So I think America, despite all their strategic thinking, stimulating, war gaming, they ultimately end up acting first and thinking later. And this is one such point that is going to vindicate what I'm going to say. Now, the second issue is, of course, America has always been polarized. In fact, the Vietnam War was lost because of the polarization in the minds of the people, the citizens of America, rather than the battlefield of Vietnam. So I think polarization is one of the factors which goes against most of the decisions the American leadership takes. Now, coming specifically to what is happening today, I think this intervention is not going to stand the test of the legality, because at least in Afghanistan it was the global war against terrorism, against Iraq it was the WMDs, but here a narcotic does not pose a threat to your nation. It's not something that you are going to do in self-defense. So therefore it's not going to stick out. The second point is the global. I am more worried about the globalized, the situation. How globe is polarized. Because America can be polarized, they can sort it out within their own geographic boundaries. But what's going to happen on the globe? The Chinese have given a very strong statement. The Russians again are very vocal. On the other side, the Nexus, the Iran, they are all also very skeptical. Well, the American allies have given very muted and a politically correct statement, but that doesn't actually hold ground. So the point I'm trying to make is this is a situation which America has created for itself. I think it's not going to go through very smoothly. The things are very complex, and the best was this should not have been done, to my mind. And if it has been done, it's only going to complicate situations not only within America but at the globe at large. So I think that this action is not going to stand the legality or even the global norms, and further going to say that while President Trump doesn't want to be a global policeman, but it wants to be a global judge. Now that's what is the transition that I can see. Devika.
Okay, talking about the world, then I want to bring in Alison Matlab into the conversation. Alison, I have to understand from you. Europe is divided over the legality of this raid. Is there now some sort of a growing fear that this New York trial sets a precedent where any leader's sovereignty is only as strong as their relationship with Washington?
I think that's a very good point you've raised. Definitely in Europe, where we have a war, Russia invaded Ukraine 4 years ago, almost, there are concerns there that maybe Russia would get an idea and go and capture Zelensky and accuse him, indict him for a number of crimes. I mean, they accuse him of being a Nazi and other things, but it's very easy to concoct a whole list of charges. So there are concerns, I think, in Europe that this does set a precedent. But on the other hand, Europe is divided because Europe, the United States is a military superpower and it's an important member of NATO. And while Donald Trump has cold feet, he is trying to assert himself unilaterally on the world stage militarily. The US is still part of NATO, and Europe, it is increasing its spending on defense, which is important. It's up to 5% of its GDP. That's the goal. But the United States is still the big player, and Europe doesn't want to upset Donald Trump too much. So while there are concerns, the criticism of what Donald Trump has done has been muted. Of course, there has been criticism or neutral statements, but there hasn't been the international condemnation that might be expected in such a case, not at all.
Okay. Then I want to also bring the same question to Mr. Andrew Latham. Mr. Latham, I have to understand from your perspective, does this now somewhere send out a message that a country's leadership is only safe if they are in good relations with Washington?
I think that's the fear. I think the bigger picture here is, and this was alluded to by one of my co-panelists earlier, is that the liberal international order, now rebranded as the rules-based international order, built by the United States and Canada and Britain and a few other countries in the aftermath of the Second World War, globalized once the Soviet Union went away. And for all America's military catastrophes, it was the Soviet Union that was consigned to the dustbin of history, not the United States. It was globalized, but now it's falling apart. The United Nations Security Council is totally dysfunctional. Why? Because all the major players have a veto. Not all of them. India, of course, largest population, doesn't have a veto, but the US does, China does, Russia does, etc. And many of the other institutions of global governance and international politics are not fit for purpose anymore. They simply don't work. And so the old order is dying. The new order has yet to be born. And this is a very troubling moment in world history. And it's troubling because precedents now are being set that are going to have knock-on effects in terms of war and peace and prosperity down the road. And if one of those precedents is that might makes right, which, by the way, has always been part of international politics, but for a good 70 years, that was kind of put on the back burner, but it's back now. If might is right, then countries like the United States and perhaps Russia and perhaps China, despite their somewhat hypocritical criticisms of the United States in this regard, might also see it as in their interests to, I was about to say kidnap, but I'll use a more neutral term, capture foreign heads of state and extradite them, again, another quasi-technical term, back to their home country for trial on charges which are utterly, if you'll pardon the use of the language, trumped up. That's the concern. My concern going forward, having young kids, is the world that they are about to inherit is not the world I inherited, which was problematic enough, but at least there was rule of law, there were global governance institutions, there was a sense of sovereignty, and when states violated those, there were repercussions. Those days are passing, that age is passing, and as I said, the new order has yet to be built, and if it's built by the likes of President Trump, I'll leave your viewers to fill in the blanks.
Okay, Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, then bring you into the conversation, sir. What really is the larger message that America under Trump is trying to send to the world, in your opinion? And I'll just give a little bit more context to my question. I'm asking that because for a very long time, Ambassador Kapoor, we've spoken about the American deep state and the ability of the American deep state to orchestrate regime changes in countries where the regime was viewed as anti-American or where the regime was viewed as pro one of America's quote-unquote enemies. However, we now see Donald Trump entering another nation and picking up its head of state in the middle of the night. Is that going to be the new normal going forward for the US?
Well, the American administration has already issued statements saying that Cuba, Colombia, Mexico better watch out. Plus they have told that much worse things are going to happen to the current acting president of Venezuela if she does not toe the line. So those are statements which in the normal discourse would have been absolutely shocking for the whole world. But it's like, one of the panelists was saying, it's a new normal. And if the world does not react sufficiently strongly and set right what has been done to Maduro in Venezuela, the possibility of the thing continuing or other things happening similarly in other parts of the world by other countries is going to increase, and that's going to lead to even more chaos in the global order. And the UN, as it is, seems to have outlived its utility. And whether a new organization can at all be created under such conditions is something which is, very much out there for discussion. But it's going to be a very, very difficult phase for the world to sort of cope with and to emerge out of, because you have appended the entire system and the entire definition of international law by this very act. Because what had been done earlier in the entire history, centuries back, the East India Company went to colonize India for economic reasons and then started ruling it militarily, etc., etc. But so you have put the world centuries back by this act, not decades, but by centuries. Secondly, the only instance which happened in modern history was the case of Panama, where Manuel Noriega was abducted similarly. But that was a time when there was not social media, no internet, no computers, no mobile phones. So all the discussion was limited to radios and television channels primarily, and the print media and other such, meetings internationally, diplomats, UN. But so the UN cry which was raised at that time was much less, though it did impact a lot of diplomats all over the world, for whom it was a very intense matter of discussion. So we were all engaged in very intense discussion at that time. But now the whole world, everybody is a global player in the whole world today. So the whole world is seeing it. So to see a president of a sovereign country being paraded like a common criminal, it's going to definitely impact a lot of things in the future. And whether US has not only just said about these countries I mentioned, Cuba, Colombia, Mexico, but it's also talked about taking over Greenland. It's talked about, taking over the Gulf of Mexico, renaming the Gulf of Mexico. It's talked about taking over Canada as a province. So, these are things which in the normal discourse would be considered as very strange. But now people are discussing it as if it's a matter which can happen. So, for me, everything is up in the air. Thank you.
Okay, Vijan Trivedi, bringing you back into the conversation, so I have to understand from you as well then. The US currently is claiming that this was not an act of war, that this was an act of defense and for the protection of US interests, but it is not an act of war. Now, one can argue that yes, the US administration under Donald Trump has been a lot about just putting the visuals out there. It's a lot about what it looks like, what's the imaging that's going to go out to the world. And the imaging has been really sharp as far as this particular, one can say, invasion is concerned. But in your perspective, does that argument really stand that this was not really an act of war?
Well, Devika, this argument doesn't stand. Because when you pick up a head of a country from that country, bring it back, you have violated the sovereignty of the country. And therefore, this argument doesn't stand. And when you act in self-defense, that means that your own geographic boundaries or your own sovereignty have been impinged. And this narcotic, so-called narcotic framework is not actually violated the sovereignty of United States of America. So therefore, it doesn't hold good. Secondly, I won't call it new normal. I think it is an aberration which is abnormal, because this kind of thing will not be undertaken by any person who has bit of sanity. So therefore, I think it is an aberration or an exception which is very specific to the current leadership of the USA. Thirdly, this playbook is not going to work, because the Narenko case is gone, dead and gone, because today world is not in unipolar framework. Every country is trying to exert itself. And I can tell you, in time to come, there will be retribution, there will be pushback, and this whole episode is going to be again stick, I think, badly on the current leadership of America. And my last point is, as a war veteran, I think there may come a time when the forces, after all forces all over the world, have one duty to obey lawful command. And therefore, this also may come as a big question mark, how far you can push the professional forces to do something which apparently may not be very professional. I think this will be a thought among the military leaders of USA, and possibly for the defense planners who think more sanely than the ones who do not. Devika.
Right, absolutely. On that note, I thank all of our guests for joining us. I've completely run out of time, but thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. With that, a very short break.